winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it's 9:01. A very good evening to you. This is indeed Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Thank you so much for joining us. 60 minutes of the very latest news from the heart of Africa to the corners of the globe as we bring you plenty stories on what's new, what's developing, and of course what is topical. We bring you the news, the voices and the perspectives that matter. Your world, your hour. This is Africa World Hour. So reach out to us. Let us know what's happening in your world. The WhatsApp number to send your thoughts, your insights to 063-406-9126. And of course, you can reach out to us via social media at Channel Africa 1. That's on TikTok, Instagram, on YouTube. We are on Channel Africa on Facebook. And remember, you can stream live. We are live on the SABC Plus app. All you have to do is download the app and you can listen to us on the DSTV audio bouquet channel 802-628. That's on OpenView channel. Let's take you through our top stories this hour. Sudan's former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok says the conflict in his country has led to an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Hamdok says there are more than 100,000 people who have been killed in the war. He also thanked those who helped the country so far.
Our expectations from our brothers and sisters at all levels, leadership and the public in the continent, to help us address this crisis. But also I must also commend many countries in the continent and even beyond, generously received our people as refugees in many places.
And political analyst Roland Hindwood says the Iranian government's attack on American military base in Qatar was an attempt to save face amongst its people. The United States at the weekend launched airstrikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. Tehran responded by firing missiles at U.S. Al Udeid base in Qatar, which is America's largest military base in the Middle East. Henwood says Iran warned the U.S. of its intentions well in advance.
It's an off-ramp for Iran to save face in the context of what has happened for the domestic audience mostly. And I say this because what we know is that the Iranians informed America that they are going to launch the missiles to the base before the time, so they had ample time to make sure that there would be no casualties. It did not hit anything significantly. The US, by the way, moved the aircraft that were not in hardened shelters away from there probably about 10 days ago because they were planning and they knew this was a risk.
The UN Human Rights Office says Israel has weaponized food in Gaza, calling it a war crime. The Rights Office says over 410 people have been killed trying to reach aid points run by the US and Israel, backed by a GHF organization. The BBC's Hugo Bachega has more details.
The health authorities in Gaza say at least 20 people were killed earlier today. Again, another shooting that was involving aid distribution in Gaza. The Israeli military saying that it is reviewing the details of this incident. But again, what we're seeing here is what the United Nations has said. It is the weaponization of aid. You have a very limited amount of aid being handed out through this new mechanism. And you have tens of thousands of Palestinians who are desperate for aid. And
a 2-day NATO summit gets underway on African exports and the imposition of visa and travel restrictions on some African countries. That's come under the spotlight at the US-Africa Business Summit in the Angolan capital of Luanda. The meeting has gathered a significant number of high-level attendees. So we'll get to that story. Rather, let's go back to the summit on NATO. It's underway in the Netherlands today, with allies expected to commit to massively increased defense spending. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says they'll agree to spend 5% of their GDP on core defense and broader security investments annually within the next decade. Speaking at a public forum before the summit began, he explains why this is necessary.
We know that Russia is reconstituting itself at a speed which is really staggering and frightening. So we have to stand ready. If we don't, we cannot defend ourselves in 3 to 5 years from now. Today they know if they try anything, our reaction will be devastating. But we have to make sure that in 3 to 5 years they won't try. So if we want to prevent war, spend more. Peace through strength, we can put every label on it, but they are all true.
And back to the summit that is taking place in Luanda, issues such as the U.S. tariffs on African exports and the imposition of visa and travel restrictions on some African countries have come under the spotlight at the U.S.-Africa Business Summit in the Angolan capital of Luanda. The meeting has gathered a significant number of high-level attendees, including African presidents, heads of government, ministers, senior U.S. government officials and leaders from U.S. and African companies. Phil Nello is an independent commentator.
We had the Secretary General of the African Union who actually raised this issue, this concern about the United States wanted to do business with the African countries, the same time that they are imposing new restrictions on visa for some African countries. And the answer came immediately from Mr. Troy Fitzgerald, who is the head of the African Affairs at the State Department, who assured Africans that there has been no further restriction on African countries in order to do business with Africa or Africans traveling to the United States.
And South Africa's Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen has confirmed that he will contest the leadership of the party as he approaches the end of his term next year. Speculation has been rife that some influential people in the DA are pushing for his candidacy for a third term. Steenhuisen says he would like to continue to lead. He was speaking on the sidelines of the party's 25th birthday party. Steenhuisen says polls have shown that his leadership team has grown the party since taking over in 2019.
I love the Democratic Alliance. I think that I inherited a party in 2019 with a leader that had walked off the job, with the party sitting at 16% in the polls, and many people said the death of the DA. And we've been able to turn this party around to the point now where it's a party of national government. I'd like to continue. I'd like to finish what I've started, and certainly the local government elections I think would be a very good ending point for a particular leadership career, and so I'd like to lead the party into the local government elections.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And it's 9 minutes past 9. Just to let you know that at about 20 past 9, we will be speaking to the leader of the Socialist Party in Zambia to just speak to him about the latest ongoings over the funeral of the late former president Edgar Lungu, what the source of the fighting between government and his family is, and how this is likely to impact Zambians and the former president's legacy. But first, let's start with this issue. Former South African President Thabo Mbeki says the situation in the Middle East has an impact not only on that region, but also many other countries. Mbeki, who celebrated his 83rd birthday on Sunday, chose to weigh in on the current peace and security challenges around the world, especially focusing on the current wars in the Middle East and Sudan. Bonolo Maribe has more.
It was a day to celebrate and to be showered with presents. In his speech, former President Thabo Mbeki maintained the tradition of reading and following the news. He called on the international community not to be silent about the dangerous situation developing in the Middle East.
There's a conflict. Everybody in the world has been saying this conflict around Iran should be solved by negotiations, by peaceful means. But the way it's moving now, it's escalating towards even more violence. More people dead, more destruction. It's worrying.
However, he warned that the most impactful war is the one raging in Sudan on the African continent.
The number of people who are dying in Sudan now is larger than the number of people that are dying in Gaza and Ukraine together. The larger numbers of people are dying in Sudan. So the Sudanese said, do something. So we made a commitment, give it. As a foundation, we said, all right, we will do something.
The former Prime Minister of Sudan, Abdallah Hamdok, made a plea for more intervention.
We would like South Africa to get involved more actively in our case, His Excellency, the President Cyril Ramaphosa. And he assured us that South Africa will definitely be involved in the Sudanese conflict, help us address this. There is a lot of history between our countries. South Africa has an excellent, unique experience that can be extremely useful to us.
Meanwhile, some Sudanese are in South Africa to seek advice from Pretoria and eminent South Africans to ensure that Africa leads efforts to stop fighting in Sudan. Bonolo Maribe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
So let's find out what's happening now in the east of the continent. The armed conflicts in Ethiopia's Amhara and Oromia regions and the lingering impact of the 2020 to 2022 war in Tigray has devastated rural livelihoods, leaving many families food insecure. In response, the International Committee of the Red Cross, together with the Ethiopian Red Cross Society, recently provided seed and fertilizers to over 10,000 vulnerable families ahead of the rainy season. To tell us a bit more about this urgent humanitarian intervention and the ongoing challenges in the region, we're joined now by Stephen Anderson, ICRC Communication Coordinator in Addis Ababa. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Stephen.
Good evening. Pleased to be with you. Thank you very much.
Let's just first start with a broader picture of what is happening post the conflict in Tigray, as I mentioned, and the ongoing tensions in the Oromia and Amhara regions.
Yes, in Ethiopia, we have a situation with two regions that are actually facing active hostilities. So there is fighting going on in those regions. And these are the two most populous regions of the country, in Amhara and in Oromia. So there are a number of consequences for the population. And we have still, of course, the situation in Tigray, where there was an armed conflict, very devastating armed conflict, 2 years, conflict from November 2020 to November 2022. And there we have lasting effects still on the population. Situation is not back to normal. So in this framework, indeed, as you mentioned in the introduction, we have looked at the situation of a number of rural communities who are facing a dire situation in terms of food insecurity. And we have carried out this month-long activity, which has just finished now with distributing seeds and fertilizers in those regions.
I believe North Wollo in Amhara states is actually particularly in terms of the challenges being faced there. Is that because of where the conflict is concentrated?
Yeah, this is a region that is actually facing conflict since many years because it was also affected by the conflict in Tigray. So it's quite close to southern Tigray. And it's an area in which there are regularly armed confrontations, and it's really trapped in the middle of various front lines. So it's quite isolated and difficult to reach. So in this area, there are two municipalities in particular, Anya, Bugna, and Lasta municipalities in North Wollo in Amhara. These are municipalities where the population has really struggled to manage to cope with the situation, especially in terms of incomes and agricultural productivity. So this is indeed an area that we have targeted in this humanitarian response that has just finished now.
And just if you could also paint a picture for us what it looks like in these regions. Are they largely isolated because of the fighting, as in have most of the citizenry fled because of the fighting?
There have been some people who fled indeed, but most of them are trying to remain in those areas. But they face a very, very difficult situation. So, for example, we spoke with a 30-year-old woman who lives there in this municipality with 7 family members, so in Aina Bugna. And she told us that they used to be able to buy seeds and fertilizers to farm the land. but that since 3 years, because of the conflicts and other problems, they couldn't get any by themselves. So don't have enough food, and she said the poverty is coming to them, which is why it was a timely support that we provided with the Ethiopian Red Cross as well.
So tell us about your intervention efforts. As you mentioned that you have been speaking to the people who populate this area. Through those conversations, how were you able to tailor the needs that they have, and what are they specifically?
Yes, actually the operation took place in 2 phases. First, there was a survey to really define the areas and the villages, the municipalities where the situation is most dire. And once we have identified those, of course, there is a preparation of the distribution to organize things. So this took 1 full month in terms of the response. The preparation was longer, of course, in the making. And to give you an idea, we distributed on average 100 kilos of fertilizers and about 10 to 12 kilos of seeds from either haricots or sorghum, teff, depending on the different areas. So what the ICRC did as well was to tailor this assistance to each region's agroclimatic conditions, and also depending on the different specificities of the crops, to make sure that they get the right fertilizer to be able to get the maximum outcome after farming, hoping, of course, for a good rainy season.
And that's my next question, really. What is being hoped for with this distribution of seeds, the type of production that is being hoped for?
Yes, so in total, there is an anticipated, of course, ideal target to get for these populations some 17,000 metric tons of food. So in total, for the 63,000 people that have actually received those seeds and fertilizers, I'm talking here about total numbers, including the families. So 17,000 metric tons of food. This will be haricots, beans, maize, wheat, sorghum, teff, which is a small grain that is a staple crop in Ethiopia. So this would be through the cultivation of about 6,500 hectares of land. That's what we're hoping for, all being well.
Stephen
depending,
Anderson.
of course, also on the rains.
Stephen Anderson, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. He is the communication coordinator at the International Committee of the Red Cross in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, speaking to us about the emergency aid relief that they have just been distributed in Ethiopia, particularly the Amhara and Oromia regions where there is ongoing conflict. And also, as he mentioned, this is as a result also of the conflict in the Tigray region. It's 20 minutes past 9.
Este é o Caleidoscópio de Canal África, com Remo Samo e João Yabalá.
O surto da cólera em Angola tem causado grande preocupação, afetando já mais de metade das províncias do país. Simultaneamente, a Agência dos Estados Unidos para o Desenvolvimento Internacional, USAID, um dos maiores doadores mundiais de assistência humanitária, decidiu não priorizar os países com maior incidência de malária. Para discutirmos as causas do alastramento da cólera em Angola e os impactos dessa decisão da USAID, convidamos o Dr. Jeremias Agostinho, médico e mestre em saúde pública, para partilhar a sua visão sobre o tema.
A doença, nesse momento, representa o maior risco de saúde pública que nós temos. Nos últimos anos, a nossa preocupação esteve sempre centrado com os casos de malária, os casos de tuberculose e também de infecção por VIH-Sida. A forma como, em pouco menos de 2 meses, os casos de cólera vêm aumentando, acaba por representar, nessa altura, um dos maiores desafios que o país tem. É expectável que, nesta fase, o número de casos venha a aumentar.
De segunda a sexta-feira, das 20 às 21 horas locais, este é o Caleidoscópio do Canal África.
At the forefront. The most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Sipiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
All right, let's continue with some of the developing top stories on the continent and beyond. This time we talk about Zambia. Some interesting news that's just come through, and that is Zambia's Attorney General has approached the Pretoria High Court in South Africa seeking to halt the burial of the former President Edgar Lungu until disputes over his final resting place are resolved. The court is expected to hear the matter tomorrow morning. We're joined now by Dr. Fred Member, President of the Socialist Party of Zambia, who's just arrived in South Africa for that expected funeral of former President Lungu. A very good evening to you, Dr. Member. So, speak to us about these latest developments. Were you surprised to hear of them?
It's very difficult to understand why Mr. Hichilema's government is insistent on burying President Lungu in Lusaka and them taking charge of the funeral. A person is buried by his friends and family. A corpse belongs to nobody, but with the first claimant being the family. There is nobody whose corpse is owned by the state. The state does not own a human being. So we can't understand why Mr. Hichilema, who was not on talking terms with Mr. Lungu, who was a friend of Mr. Lungu, who had no dealings whatsoever with Mr. Lungu, he's insistent on getting him buried in Lusaka and with him being in charge of the funeral. You can't be in charge of a funeral of a person you never spoke to, you had no relationship with. You had also stripped of all honors. Why are they interested in honoring a corpse when they were not interested in honoring a human being who was alive? They are placing death above life. Life is more important than death. They never honored him in his life. Why are they so insistent on giving him military honors in his death?
Dr. Member, that's precisely my question. What is behind all of this animosity, the disagreements? And we were under the impression that former President Lungu was indeed going to receive a state funeral in Zambia with the stipulations that the family had made, given the fact that there were talks between the two parties. How did the situation deteriorate so quickly and to this point?
When you get into a deal with another person or with others, you need to honor that deal. And if you don't honor that deal, the deal breaks. Mr. Hichilema's government started to abrogate the deal, the terms of the deal. Immediately they clinched the deal. They were triumphant. They thought they had it their way. And they could ignore what they had agreed with. The family pulled the plug and decided to bury him here. And they find nothing much wrong with burying him here. The national anthem of Zambia says, Africa is our own motherland, fashioned with and blessed by God's good hand. South Africa is Mr. Lungu's homeland as well. South Africa is Africa. How many people were buried in Zambia from South Africa? He died here. He didn't die in Zambia. He died here. And the laws of this country allow him to be buried here. And the laws of this country give precedence to his family over his burial.
Are you able to tell us about the talks? What were the demands, if I may put it in that manner? And as you mentioned, that there was something that broke the camel's back. what was it that created this current situation? Because obviously we hear reports, but I know you are close with the family. As we've spoken the last time, you're close friends with former President Lungu. What was in the agreement? What was it that the family believes would have undermined former President Lungu's wishes?
One was the prevention of the public from going to the airport to receive his body. Attendance at his funeral became by invitation. The Zambian government were going to invite who they want, and who they don't want stayed away from the funeral. That was not what they had agreed. The second issue was over.
So are you suggesting, Dr. Member, that the government was going to prohibit Zambians from meeting former President Lungu at the airport on arrival?
Yes, they issued a program that said attendance at the airport was invitation. And who was going to invite? Themselves. Who are they going to invite? It's only them who know. They didn't want this funeral to be a mass funeral, in my view. They wanted it to be contained on their terms. They wanted to bury him in Zambia, but on their terms and under their control or supervision.
So what else was on the list of demands, and what else, became a source of contention?
One of the big issues was the keeping of his body. They wanted to take his body to some place in the air base, the Air Force base, which the family, I'm told, did not agree with because it was not part of the. The agreement was that the family was going to keep the body throughout until its burial.
Now let's talk about this
issue. The government abrogated that in the program they issued.
I want to talk about this issue of not only just the symbolism, but the aspect of former President Lungu being a public figure. And I want to look beyond the full military honors, which the Attorney General is citing as reasons for why they believe him being buried in Zambia.
It's a horrible case taken by the Attorney General of Zambia. There's no legal basis, even in Zambian law. There's no piece of legislation in Zambia that requires the former president to be buried in the way they're suggesting. There's no such a law that they can quote.
So beyond the legal basis,
they are quoting precedents. Those precedents are not legal precedents. There's no law, and I'm a lawyer. I'm talking to you as a lawyer. There's no law. And I challenge anybody to show me what that law is in Zambia. There's no such a law in Zambia.
So, Dr. Member, they mention the legal precedent of the founding president's burial, Dr. Kaunda, how there were some considerations there relating to internment at Embassy Park as a reason for asking to do this. But my bigger, deeper question is around national interest. So the citing of former President Lungu as a public figure and a national symbol, how...
National interest is not a law. There's no law called national interest. I was very close to Dr. Kaunda. Dr. Kaunda didn't want it to be buried where he's buried. But that came up as a matter of agreement later on. There was a division within Kaunda's family. There were those who went with the government, and there were those who were opposed to the government to bury him where he's buried. But at the end of the day, those who were with the government won. So there was a division in Kaunda's family. But it was not by law necessarily. There's no law that compels a former president to be buried the way they're suggesting. There's no such a law. And there's no law that can allow them in the courts of South Africa. There's no such a law. It's an exercise in futility.
Okay.
What I don't understand is their desperation, excessive desperation, to bury a person they never liked.
What do you think informs that? What do you think is behind that?
There's so much speculation about it. There's so much speculation about some of it bordering on things I can't mention here. Superstitions that are surrounded. There's talk about superstition and so on, unfortunately.
What do you anticipate is going to happen tomorrow, and how do you think it will impact not only Zambia's national image, but unity, national unity? Zambian people, how they affected by whatever.
National unity does not border on what Mr. Hichilema decides. Mr. Hichilema is not national unity. As Mr. Lungu has demonstrated, Mr. Lungu is gone. If national unity was based on Mr. Lungu's wishes, we would have no national unity. Dr. Kaunda was there. It was a unifying factor. He's gone. If national unity was based on Kaunda, we would have national unity. In this country, there was Nelson Mandela. Nelson is gone. If Madiba was the only symbol for national unity or the unifying factor, then there would be no unity. So unity is not based on one individual. Unity is based on creating a just and fair system of governance and respect. That's what builds national unity. Injustice does not build national unity. Vengeance does not build the nation. If there is no justice, you will not have national unity. Wherever there is no national unity, if you examine closely, you'll find that there is no group that feels unfairly treated or that is being treated in a manner that is unacceptable.
All right.
So it's not Mr. Lungu or Mr. Hichilema or Dr. Kaunda who create national unity for us. It's the systems of government we put in place, how fair they are, how just they are.
All right. Unfortunately, Doctor, remember we have to end it here. But before you go, do you anticipate that the funeral will go ahead tomorrow?
It will go ahead. They have, and I don't think the High Court in Pretoria will entertain their injunction.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
It has got no legal basis.
Thank you very much for your time, and we wish you well in the business that you're here for. And I know it's a very sad occasion, burying a friend. So we wish you and his friends and family well in the assignment ahead of you. Thank you very much, Dr. Fred Membe, President of the Socialist Party of Zambia. He's here in Johannesburg, preparing for the mooted funeral of former President of Zambia, Edgar Lungu, tomorrow.
Stella Longwe pamalonje
palitusokoma pano pamalonje kumvera nyimbo za mu Africa kusangalala kupeza moyo akuti kumva moyo kuti kuyenda bwino pano pamalonje ndiyetu apa tili ndikatswiri oyimba ameneyu ndikatswiri wa dziko la Malawi amene akukhala mdziko la South Africa ndipo amayimba amene akuti ndi Big Nick Malawi. Yatusani kuti kodi moyo wanu woyimba ukuyenda bwanji mu Johannesburg?
Moyo woyimba ukuyenda bwino kwambiri. Chiliyonse chikutheka ndithu bwino.
Ayi aziwoneka chiliyonse chikutheka mofa magrasi anu apa mwaka. Akuti kumenya yonse aziwoneka zoti azikutheka ndithu mu Johannesburg.
Malonje pa nthawi ya 6 koloko kufikira 7 koloko madzulo. Lowiruka ndi Stella Longwe. The Midnight Snack, 12 to 3 a.m.
Interracial relationships. And now you are based in the States and you are married to a beautiful white woman, white lady.
I learned that, for us in our culture, we literally can speak our mind. I remember when we started dating and whatnot, and, she picked up like a little bit of weight. And I was like, oh, wow, you must be happy in this relationship because look at you. You look great. You're even picking up some weight. And she got really, really offended. And it took I think it was about a couple of hours before I could realize that, because I could tell that she was off after that. And it took me a while to figure out what it was. Until later when I was talking to her, I'm like, you're really, really off today. And then she expressed that, yeah, because you're telling me that I'm picking on some weight. And I'm like, in my culture, when you are gaining some weight, it means you're happy. Yes. So that's what I was trying to imply.
The Midnight Snack, every Monday, 12 to 3 a.m. with Chanduko Ligege. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
23 minutes to 9. Let's continue with some of the top stories here on Africa World Hour. This time we talk about Africa as a forefront of global stablecoin adoption, with a new report by Yellow Card revealing the continent holds a 9.3% share of global usage and over 54 million digital asset users. Nigeria tops the charts globally for stablecoin adoption and ranks second for overall digital assets with nearly 26 million users. The 2025 report on the state of digital assets regulation in Africa also places 10 African nations in the top 50 digital asset adopters worldwide, including Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. For more on this, we are joined on the line by Kamohelo Musime, Yellow Card's country manager of South Africa. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Kamohelo. Firstly, what is Yellow Card? Tell us a little bit more about the business, and then we can get into the conversation around what stablecoin is and what stablecoin adoption is.
Thank you so much, Tsepiso, and thank you also for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure. So Yellow Card. So essentially, we are a crypto infrastructure provider. We operate purely in the African market, and our purpose is, the common purpose that every financial services company that exists in Africa wants to achieve, and that's to achieve, financial inclusion within the continent, to enable more users to be able to access the global markets, and to remit funds. So our core business is basically through remittances using crypto-based rails, basically allowing you to send money from one country to another where you're able to settle it in local currency of another African country. So basically we offer OTC trading services. We have a white label API that B2B customers can use if they want to set up their own business, which is very similar to ours. We also offer a widget, which is very similar to the API, but it's basically purely for crypto assets. So at a very high level, that is who Yellow Card is. That is what we do. We're about a 9-year-old company, We were founded by Chris Maurice and Justin Piru. They're both based in the States. And they've been making some serious strides on the continent.
And we mentioned that at the beginning that Africa has emerged as a global leader in the adoption of stable coins and digital assets. Yeah. So you told me about Yellow Coin. So tell me a little bit more about stable coins. And I want it to be as elementary as possible, because I know you, in your world, this is your day-to-day, but you are introducing this to, including myself.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the stablecoin adoption in Africa, and particularly Nigeria, as you pointed out, is being driven by real economic necessity. So, something I like to say to people is, in this kind of sphere, crypto and stablecoins are kind of a fad when you look at it in the first world context. In Africa, we have a real problem to solve. People really do have the need for certain financial infrastructures. People don't have access to platforms that allow them to, it's very popular in Africa where, you have someone from Zimbabwe working in South Africa, for example, and they've got a family back home that they need to send money to. Now, obviously, if you're using typical banking infrastructure, there are limitations. There's protocols that the banks need to take. There's time, costliness to the end user. I mean, it can take 3 to 5 days for such a process to take place. So companies like ours kind of help bypass those sort of challenges that, the average consumer faces, because you essentially download a platform. Through that platform, you buy, an asset on a decentralized chain, USD Tether, and that essentially allows you to kind of almost bypass the financial system with its nuances. So if you think about it this way, I've got a mother who stays in an African country outside of the one I'm currently based in. I ask her to download the application. I send her USD Tether, and then through a local partner where she is, she can then settle those funds and she can then gain fiat in that local currency. So I've tried to be as elementary as possible in kind of explaining one use case, but basically in Africa, those are the sorts of problems that we are solving. We're a very nuanced economy, the African continent. So we are forced to innovate, especially when it comes to the financial services, to try to provide these sort of solutions to end users who are otherwise marginalized.
So I'm going to use an analogy, and you're going to tell me if this is what you're saying. And I'm thinking of, you mentioned other organizations and vehicles that help with remittances. So basically, say, for instance, I have a peach and I need to send a peach over to my mother who's in another country. But because of the lack of vehicles that are available, so how you bypass that is that I give you my peach and you turn it into a banana in order to be able to navigate the space, and then you revert it back to a peach to my relative in another country. Is that analogy basically?
Exactly.
Okay. So
yes,
and I'd imagine that, of course, for a lot of African citizens who have indeed gone around the world to find a better livelihood, remittance is the number one, black tax as we call it, is the number one priority, and some of these are in rural settings. So are you working with partners, or are you saying that, for instance, as YOLOcard, that's how quickly your business is growing because of the pressing needs?
So we do work with partners in all our markets. So YOLOcard is very uniquely positioned. And what I've seen through other businesses is that, the most common mistake made when it comes to Africa is not understanding your localized market and localizing yourself within that market. So I think where YOLOcard is winning at this, and the reason why YOLOcard is currently the biggest in terms of African continental presence, is because we're based in 20 different African countries, but we are localized in all of those countries. Every one of those countries has a country or a regional manager. We have people on the ground, we've got a local entity, and we adhere to local regulation for that specific market. And so that allows for partnership opportunities within the local market from a PSP point of view, from other strategic partners who are able to help us, for example, settle funds within that specific market. So we do work with partnerships. We do work with a lot of partnerships on a local basis. That model is actually quite crucial to our success. Also in helping us understand the nuances within each market, because, to be a massive, European-based company trying to unlock these opportunities in Africa without really understanding the context from a local, point of view is a true one-way ticket to failure, if I can say so. And I, from my experience, I can tell you I've seen this happen many times, and I think this is where YOLOcard differs. So yes, we do definitely, leverage partnerships in all the jurisdictions that we're in, and it's actually crucial to our operations.
So how many countries are you operational in? And if you can just tell me about the financial landscapes and the importance of that nuance that you talk about. What bans exist in one that doesn't exist in another, and how do you navigate that?
100%. So we are currently present in 20 different markets across the African continent. We've got a team of about 190 employees company-wide, and we make a point of hiring within the African continent because we need people on the ground who understand the nuances of each of their markets. One of the biggest nuances that we face is regulation. The regulatory environments across the continent impact things like, adoption trends, which countries are most progressive and which have clearer policy developments than others. And I'd say regulation is the thing that really plays a pivotal role for us and solving for those regulatory nuances. So where we do see clarity, we see growth. So if I use South Africa as an example, because I'm the South African country manager, we've taken the lead through licensing. The FSCA, which is our governing financial body, has seen licensing of 248 crypto asset service providers, and that falls underneath the existing Phase Act. It's practical, it's adaptive, and it gives operators certainties and regulators oversights. Now, when it comes to other markets, they prove to be a little bit more difficult. So, for example, there are certain markets we haven't entered because they don't have that regulatory sort of framework in place. And if it's a market that we see opportunity in, we will then send people on the ground to try to understand, meet regulators, meet the lawmakers, work with local banks there to see if there is something we can come around in. But the overall trend is moving in the right direction in the continent. Governments are realizing that digital assets are not going away, so they have to be embraced, and they have to be, embraced responsibly.
You talk about building or increasing investor confidence by also utilizing foreign policy influence from countries like the USA. Can you just be a little bit more clearer on what exactly do you mean by that?
So basically, Yellow Card, we are deeply engaged, as I mentioned, from a regulatory standpoint, in making sure we solve for those kind of nuances. We've actively participated in working groups. We've submitted policy recommendations, ensured full compliance in markets like South Africa. While we're fully licensed as a CASP under the FSCA, our goal is to primarily build trust, both with the users, both with the regulators. And we also take a proactive approach. And we want to be as transparent as possible. And we also want to be responsible because at the end of the day, we're trying to achieve one common goal, which is to, make sure we're benefiting the end user. So we use our footprint across, all our regions to help, harmonize the understanding between markets. And regulation, as we see it, doesn't really have to be a blocker. If it's done right, it's actually a multiplier of growth and investor confidence. I hope I understood that question properly.
Well, I mean, we're both trying to speak the same language in different languages, right? But Kamokhelo, Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. And, the teachings from our conversation are much appreciated. Kamokhelo Musime, Yellow Card's country manager of South Africa.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Mokwetla.
Channel Africa.
And that brings the time to 19 minutes to 10. So as we wrap up the show, just a reminder that you can reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts on some of the stories that we're covering. Give us your perspective. Now, U.S. Federal Chair Jerome Powell says that despite uncertainty and potential rise in inflation brought on by tariffs, the U.S. economy remains solid. He says the Fed would hold interest rates until there is clarity on tariffs. This as U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to announce the final stance on tariffs on July 9. Powell says inflation is expected to increase significantly in the third quarter of this year. Dimakazo Leshoro has more on this.
U.S. Federal Chair Jerome Powell has come under political pressure since Donald Trump came into office. Ahead of his appearance before the House Committee on Financial Services at the U.S. Congress, Trump posted on his Truth social media platform saying that Powell must explain why he's refusing to lower interest rates, adding that Europe has had 10 cuts, we've had 0. No inflation, great economy. We should at least be at 10 to 3 points lower, he said. Powell says a decision to cut rates is data determined. He stated that projections on inflation show that a spike is expected in the third quarter.
And at the end of the day, we do what we think is the right thing when we think it's the right thing to do. We don't take into consideration political factors.
Member of the committee, Bill Huizenga, pressed him on the Fed's monetary policy stance.
There's no recession. That's been established. There's no hyperinflation.
or certainly not as what some had been projecting. So what is it that's keeping, in your mind, the Fed from what many of us believe is the right thing to do, which is to lower some interest rates? And why aren't we doing what the rest of the world is doing?
You're right that if you just look in the rearview mirror and look at the existing data that we've seen, you can make a good argument that that would call for us to be at a neutral level, which would be a couple of cuts or maybe more kind of thing. The reason we're not is the forecast by all professional forecasters that I know of on the outside and the Fed do expect a meaningful increase in inflation over the course of this year.
In a veiled attack, chair of the committee, French Hill, told Powell to stay in his lane when it comes to tariffs.
In February of 2021, you told us in this committee that you would stay in your lane and not comment on President Biden's proposal for the American Rescue Plan or sharply increasing federal spending. And you said it was an issue, but that you would stay in your lane and not comment on it. But here in this year, you have commented on this idea of tariffs being set by the executive branch. So are tariffs in your lane?
Sure. So we haven't commented, and it would be inappropriate for us to comment on the policy of tariffs. We don't have a view. It's not our job, and we just wouldn't do that. And just as we wouldn't comment on the reconciliation package that you're working on right now. We're not commenting on tariffs. What our job is inflation, keeping inflation under control, and also keeping maximum employment. And when policies have what appear to be short and medium term implications, meaningful implications for that, then they kind of, not the policies themselves, but the inflation becomes our job.
Powell says while the world's largest economy remains solid at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty because of the tariffs, with July 9 looming, where some sort of direction is expected from President Trump. The Fed chair also addressed talk about possibly doing away with the US dollar as a reserve currency.
What makes us the reserve currency is a few things. It is our great democratic institutions. It is that we have open capital markets, very open capital markets. And it is that we have price stability and the rule of law. Those are the things that make you the reserve currency. And you can keep that status as long as you maintain those things. Of those things, the thing that we contribute is price stability over the long run. So people who want to invest in or use the dollar, they can be confident in the value of the dollar over time, that it won't fluctuate wildly or decline in ways that, and so that's our role. Really, Treasury is responsible for stewardship of the dollar, but we have that role to play as well.
The U.S. decision on interest rates has a significant impact on the cost of dollar-held debt, which many African countries have a lot of. The cost of debt is now crowding out other crucial spending, raising the debt-to-GDP ratio, leaving African economies in a perpetual cycle of indebtedness. The recently released report by the Vatican-backed Jubilee Debt Commission has called for urgent and systemic reforms to address the spiraling debt and development crises devastating countries in the global south. For Channel Africa News in Johannesburg, I'm Dimakazo Leshoro.
And that brings us to the end of the Tuesday edition of Africa World Hour. Thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate having you on these 60-minute rides as we take you from the heart of Africa to all corners of the globe. One planet, plenty stories, as we always say. And we always appreciate hearing from you, your thoughts on the program and some of what we're covering. So remember, you can keep that conversation going on WhatsApp at 063-406-9126. info@channelafrica.org is where you can send us an email. And of course, you can also reach us on Facebook, Channel Africa. Right, and we come to an end with easing you out of Africa World Hour with a song by Chile.
At mid-morning, we get on the move with Palisa and Benjamin, digging into the African lifestyle, people, and the things that make Africa smile. 12 till 1, Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, getting in-depth, powerful stories, and the perspective you won't hear anywhere else. The Upside, 1 till 4, live and real, with Tebucho Likweleni and Nompumelelo Ngubeni. Tame Ngubeni talks money, Africa in business, 4 till 5 p.m. 5 till 6, we put on a little bit more color. Vue d'Afrique with Joel Muteba. We go to East and Central Africa and find Darubinia Africa with I Am Shakif. Madapiri gives us some life. Zochitika, 7 till 8 p.m. Maria Mokumalo comes in 8 till 9. We get some useful knowledge. Kalodiscopia, 9 till 10. We take a look in Africa and beyond. Africa World Hour with Sipiso Makwetla. And we close it up with some love. The Hotlines with Shailen Dikumana, 10 till 12 p.m. on Channel Africa. Across borders, across time zones, on air, online. This is Channel Africa. Africa has a voice, and that voice is Channel Africa. It keeps you in motion, speaking, singing, questioning, rising. Wake up with Rise and Shine 6 till 9. Peter and Asanda as they bring you breaking news, sharp analysis, and the voices that shape the day. At mid-morning, we get on the move with Palisa and Benjamin, digging into the African lifestyle, people, and the things that make Africa smile. 12 till 1, Africa Update with Lulu Kabu, getting in-depth, powerful stories, and the perspective you won't hear anywhere else. The Upside, 1 till 4, live and real, with Tebucho Likweleni and Nompumelelo Ngubeni. Tame Ngubeni talks money, Africa in business, 4 till 5 p.m., 5 till 6. We put on a little bit more color. Vue d'Afrique with Joel Muteba. We go to East and Central Africa and find Darubinia Africa with I Am Shakif. Madapiri gives us some life. Zochitika, 7 till 8 p.m. Maria Mokumalo comes in 8 till 9. We get some useful knowledge. Kalodiscopia, 9 till 10. We take a look in Africa and beyond. Africa World Hour with Sipiso Makwetla. And we close it up with some love. The Hotlines with Shailen Dikumana, 10 till 12 p.m. on Channel Africa. Across borders, across time zones, on air, online. This is Channel Africa. Africa has a voice, and that voice is Channel Africa. It keeps you in motion, speaking, singing, questioning, rising. Wake up with Rise and Shine 6 till 9. Peter and Asanda as they bring you breaking news, sharp analysis, and the voices that shape the day. At mid-morning, we get on the move with Palisa and Benjamin.